Hello, hello, hello. Okay, good. We are good. Now, had to turn down my other speakers. Silly, I got this broadcasting over there, and of course, sounds coming all over the place. Thought I had everything all set up. Hi, welcome to a bonus episode of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions. Hey, everybody, glad to be here live in the middle of the week. As we sit here, yes, I'm glad that some folks who have not been here before are able to attend. Woo! And yes, surprise episode. We are anxiously awaiting as folks will come on here. I'll just gab a little bit here before we get into the questions. I've been busy setting this up all morning, and I finally have I have something now that's a little fun that I set up where you'll be able to see, hopefully, if it pops up here in a moment, questions on the screen that you guys asked me in the comments section. I've been trying to get that set up, and it's not popping up on the screen here. So, of course, we are hopeful that it will. I read that this function or this little program can have a little bit of a delay in coming up on the screen. So we'll see if this ever does get around to popping up here. But and if not, then that doesn't work, and that kind of sucks. But we'll see. I'm just going to let that go and see how long it takes to pop up there. And in the meantime, yes, we are very, very nervous about we are literally waiting on pins and needles right now for when is it that the verdict is going to come in on the Danny Masterson trial. They're literally deliberating. I think they're at lunch right this second as we're sitting here talking. Tony just posted about this, and we've been watching closely. So we're waiting with bated breath to hear what the verdict is going to be on this, what they're gonna do, and we'll see. I'm still clicking on this little thing, hoping that these will come up. They came up. I was able to pull. I got this little software that would pull comments from the chat box and throw them up on the screen, and it worked fine during the testing before we went live. But then, of course, when you go live, everything changes. So we'll see what happens with that. But in the meantime, man, we are nervous about that. Okay, now I see, and of course, we're going to be bringing up questions from the comments as we go. But I also today came prepared. This is a little. Oh, thank you, Joyce, for that wonderful super chat. Very, very, very appreciated. Thank you. I came prepared. This Q&A, these bonus episodes that we're going to be doing this week and probably next week and probably for a few weeks, is I'm going to be doing these midweek deals. And probably, or the way that I'm planning on doing this is a little different from the usual live stream Q&As that I do, because I've come with some questions prepared for you, because what I'm trying to do is catch up on the backlog of questions that I've been asked, and some of them like from a couple of years ago. I mean, I've got a very long queue of questions. I've kept up this text file with the questions you guys send me. I just copy paste. You know, when I get questions, I just throw them in my queue. And so this is a text file that's been building for quite a while. And every week I tackle about 7 to 8 questions. Some of them flash answers, some of them really long, involved answers. You know, I can go on for 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes shorter. And those are what you see on my Critical Clips channel. If you're curious about my backlog of questions that I've been asked and answered, I think I just passed like 900, or I'm coming up on like 900 clips on my Critical Clips channel. No, different YouTube channel that I keep up. And I post Monday through Friday old answers to questions I've given. Just one-off. So every video is just one question, one answer, or one clip from a podcast or video that I've produced. And so it's kind of a bite-sized version of answers for you guys. And if you don't know about that Critical Clips channel, or you're not subscribed to that, then check it out. You can get to it from the description section of my videos, or you can get to it from my homepage on my YouTube channel, or just look up Critical Clips, Chris Shelton's Critical Clips, and find them there. And there's a lot of answers to a lot of questions that you guys have asked me over the years. You know, we've done over 300, we're coming up on 400 critical Q&A episodes. This is number 386. Lots and lots of answers for you guys. And I don't mind repeating myself. I have done it many times. I've answered questions, you know, the same questions over the years, but I want you guys to know that those answers are out there for you. So anyway, do check those out. Okay, well, this is a little disappointing that my little comment thing isn't quite popping up here the way I was hoping it would. Yeah, ChrisShelton Q&A.text. That's pretty much what it's called. Anyway, yeah, a little bummer that those aren't coming up. Okay, well, that was a little failed experiment, I guess. I'll figure something else out. My second approach to this will be using StreamYard, and maybe I'll have to incorporate that into my mix here, because I want to be able to display comments and questions that you guys ask in the comments box. And it's not as easy as you might imagine to do. You'd think this would be pretty built in for the software I'm using, but it's not. So, all right, enough of this technical nonsense. So, Claire, thank you very much for your super chat there. And since we're kicking off our question section now, let's go ahead and get into it. I will take questions from the comments section, especially if you're sending me super chats. I'll definitely answer your question before this show is over. But I am going to also spend a good chunk of the time during this show answering the questions I've prepared for you guys, so I can catch up on those on that queue. All right, so Claire View asks, hey, I'm so nervous. The jury question, what do you think regarding the Masterson trial? Okay, so let's talk about that, because it is definitely what all of our minds are, and hearts and souls are involved in right now, are very invested in. So unless you've been living under a rock lately, haven't been keeping up with me or Aaron or Tony or, you know, the numerous other journalists who have been reporting on Danny Masterson's rape case, there are 3 women who have brought charges against Danny Masterson, a Scientology VIP celebrity, and his trial has been carried out, and the jury is now out to deliberate, and we're all waiting on pins and needles. The 3 women who testified were their testimony was transcribed basically by Tony Ortega and reported on, because there are no cameras allowed in the courtroom for what should be obvious reasons in a rape trial. The women aren't even identified by name. It's Jane Doe 1, 2, and 3, and the testimony was, well, of course, you know, from my point of view. Maybe I should clarify this first for everybody. I'm a former Scientologist. I grew up in Scientology. I was raised with it. I went to school with that in my background. I then joined the Church of Scientology as a staff member and did that for 8 years. And then I joined the Sea Org. I did the billion-year contract deal. And I did that for another 17 years. So 25 years altogether, not only being a Scientologist, but working for the Church of Scientology. And during that time, I was involved in the management of the Western United States Scientology churches. So I got to see all kinds of reports and communications flying around about Scientologists, some of them prominent Scientologists, some of them Scientology celebrities like Danny Masterson. And I'm not trying to claim some hidden knowledge necessarily. What I'm trying to say is that I've seen the culture of Scientology inside the group and outside the group. I've seen all the dirty deeds that go on inside and how it's justified and rationalized and how they make out perfectly evil acts to be very good things, and how the moral foundations of Scientologists and cult members in general is opposite world. They take very bad dogma, very bad ideas, and they make it make sense for themselves so that they are the good guys and they're helping people by abusing them, stalking them, harassing them, beating up on them or whatever. Or at least maybe they're not helping the people they're stalking or harassing, but they're helping the planet by stalking and harassing and abusing and hurting people that they call bad guys. They call, evil and they must be destroyed and that kind of thing. Suppressive people. That's what Scientologists label outsiders or former members who are against Scientology, who are anti-Scientology. So I've been all the way down that rabbit hole and seen as, all of that from the inside, and then, got out 10 years ago and I've been talking about it and recovering from it ever since. And so knowing all that, I only do all that setup so that I can say, I'm positive this guy's guilty. I am positive he is, because I know what Scientology does to you. And Danny Masterson's a second generation Scientologist, just like I am. He was raised in it. He never got his ass out of it. He never had any reason to question or wonder about himself or his situation. And unfortunately, with Scientology celebrities and VIPs, they get a lot of red carpet treatment, and they get a different layer of Scientology than most other Scientologists get. They're treated with kid gloves very often, that kind of thing. And he's been a big moneymaker for Scientology, and he's got a lot of influence in that group. Not as big as Tom Cruise, not even remotely as big, and certainly not even as big as as somebody like Elizabeth Moss. But he's influential, and as I've stressed over and over again during this trial, his network of connections, his family, his friends, his business associates, etc., are well-funded, well-connected people. So you can't just take Masterson and kick him out of Scientology and think there's not anything else to it. There's a lot to it. There's a lot going on there. Anyway, but getting back to what do I think about all of this? I think that he is guilty of sin. I definitely believe the women, and the testimony is credible, I think. I understand memory and memory holes and the psychology of that and trauma and what that does to you, and the expert witness, Miss Mechanic, who testified during the trial, spoke to these things, that memory of traumatic events will be disjointed, that you won't always get exactly the same story, but the base story, will remain consistent. What happened will remain consistent, but the various details of it can come and go. And when you're talking to various people, you have over different times as a victim, you have different things on your mind. You're trying to answer their questions. You're not necessarily going to just repeat, like a record player, the same story over and over and over again. It's just not realistic. And people who have this idea that's how it should be, it's not really that way, right? So we have to give some latitude to the victims and how they've gone about telling their stories. You don't want, gross hypocrisy or gross inconsistencies. And the defense is arguing that that's the case and that these women are colluding and they're a bunch of liars and they're just trying to get money out of Masterson. But when you know how depraved the Church of Scientology is and how far they'll go in stalking and harassing and abusing these women, even years after they've left Scientology, just because they're bringing this case against Masterson and blaming correctly Scientology for its attempts to cover this up, pat it down, make it go away, just like the Catholic Church did with the pedophile priests. Same drill, same things. When you see that kind of thing going on, you have to go, okay, yeah, this is a bad group doing bad things, and it's individual members who take advantage of that and use Scientology as air cover. This is where being a Scientology VIP really pays dividends. And this is where, from Masterson's point of view, the church providing all this air cover and harassment and stalking these women and that kind of thing, that's kind of his return on investment for all the years he's contributed to Scientology, is now they're helping him out. And in so doing, of course, they're trying to, help themselves out and help their toxic public image to not become even more toxic than it already is. And it's pretty bad. So anyway, so that's kind of my take on it is that I think because of, everything I know about the mindset of a Scientologist, and specifically the mindset of an entitled, privileged Scientologist like Danny Masterson, where he really feels like he's entitled to whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And one of the shocking things that came out, far from only Scientology that does this or thinks this, but really pretty shitty, that the ethics officers and the chaplains of Scientology were telling these rape victims that they not only pulled it in and were responsible for what happened to them, but that in fact, Danny Masterson is the upstat. He's the guy who is producing, and he's the one who's supporting them. So therefore, the equation goes, whatever he wants, they need to give. Without question, without reservation, certainly without complaining and moaning and bitching about it. If he wants sex, they need to give him sex, period. This is pretty gross. This is really pretty gross, but par for the course for an authoritarian high control group. Because if Scientology as an organization, as an entity, or its representatives, Miscavige, ethics officers, senior executives, demand that Scientologists do something, they expect that those Scientologists are going to do it. Because Scientology is saving the world. We're the guys who are in charge. We're the guys who are running the world. We're the guys who are moving toward running the world. And we're the guys who you need to be listening to. We're the guys who are saving you. So when we tell you to jump, your only answer is how high. I mean, that's just par for the course for Scientology, period. So, of course, they, lay this over, these women. And the women correctly were, what? I mean, no, this isn't over time. It took them a long time to process this and figure out what the hell happened to them, and then learn there were other victims. Remember, each of these victims was living in a little bit of a silo. They didn't know about the other victims. And until years later, well after, a decade later, they learned about this. So imagine being in their position. Awful. Okay, so there we go. Okay, Fabian's asking some questions here about brainwashing and auditing. Thank you for that super chat. And Frostfire here. Love the show. What do you think about Freud? Okay, good. I've noted that those questions are there. So as I was saying before, let's go ahead and let's take one of my since I've answered that one now about the Masterson trial. Let's go ahead and take up one of my preset questions and see here. Let's go there. Okay. Leo Taxel. It sounds like Scientology via the Sea Organ staff has a semi-regular sales team. Do they use any mainstream sales programs like Salesforce? You mentioned the futility of hours spent trying to sell the basics, books, and lectures packages. Did Scientology ever wise up and sell non-Scientology related products? Seems like a no-brainer to go into that since they have a dedicated sales force and are only after money. Okay. Come back to me here. There we go. Okay. So no, Scientology doesn't use Salesforce or any sort of non-Scientology created tracking or sales software or anything like that. They have their own internal systems that they've built themselves for tracking customers or parishioners. They have what's called a central files computer system, which is basically a kind of a document indexing system where letters and invoices and various things that are kept up about their parishioners are kept in computer files. But they also have to keep all of that hard copy at the same time. They haven't fully digitized and then stopped killing trees. They're still killing all the trees and keeping up all the files, but they have computerized it as well. As far as selling non-Scientology materials in Scientology organizations, I took this question up because I thought it might be of interest to y'all, that they used to actually do that. Scientology used to have individual Scientologists, authors, who would write on Scientology based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard and sell their books and materials in the churches. And there was a woman named Ruth Minshall who was rather famous for this. She wrote about 3 or 4 books, I think, about, using how to use Scientology principles in your life, raising your kids, predicting human behavior, this kind of thing. So they kind of were rewriting Hubbard and making it make a little bit more sense and a little bit more palatable to a secular audience, a non-Scientology audience. And this was a thing through the 1970s until they nixed it in the 80s and cut all that off and said, no, we're not having any of this non-source, off-source material. Absolutely not. I hadn't heard about Ruth Minshall being a Free Zone person. That's news to me. I kind of assumed she wasn't still around, but I have no idea. But I do know that they put the kibosh on this pretty hard, and nobody is authorized to be rewriting Hubbard except the church itself. And Miscavige, of course, rewrites Hubbard on a almost daily basis with the way he runs the organization and just flat out ignores L. Ron Hubbard's policies and advices and things and just kind of does whatever he wants. And he's able to spin it and justify it to the Scientologists. And that's kind of how that runs now. But there are no non-Scientology products that are being sold by Scientology organizations. They're not going there. They are exclusive. They got brand exclusivity on L. Ron Hubbard stuff, and they are sticking with that as their branding and modeling and positioning and all of that. Just throwing out, whatever marketing buzzwords I know. So there you go on that. Anyway, still a tons, yeah. So there you go with that. All right. So let's now scroll up and see. Let's go back to the next question y'all have asked me in the queue here, going to the super chats. Okay. So Fabian Andiel asks me, what is the brainwashing thing about auditing? What is the brainwashing effect? Well, there's a few, okay? It's kind of like asking what's the brainwashing effect or the addictive qualities of, high potency drugs. Well, there's a lot of things going on there. It's not just a single thing. You can talk about the neurochemistry or the brain chemistry of it, but you can also talk about the social factors and the trauma that the person might have in their own life and how that helps or mediates the person's trauma or grief or emotional processing. Scientology auditing is kind of similar. It's the drug analogy is really a pretty good analogy for Scientology auditing, even though it's the way that you induce the euphoric awe experience in Scientology auditing is different than taking a drug. You don't do it with a chemical. You do it with memory and with emotional manipulation and indoctrination. And the way you do that is you set a person up to believe that they are an immortal spiritual being who has lived, countless lives, and there are past lives, and they have access to those past life memories. And the processes of Dianetics and Scientology will give a person the idea that they can sit in a chair and close their eyes and remember shit that's happened to them, 5,000, 50,000, 5 trillion years ago. Eventually, nobody's generally showing up on day 2 and diving back to Xenu. It doesn't work that way. This is a gradual these are gradual layers of indoctrination, and priming is another word for this, where you set up expectations with what's this auditing going to do for you? What's it look like? How is it run? What are we doing in this auditing? Well, what we're doing is we're addressing these, these traumatic episodes and in Scientology, they don't even use the word trauma. I use the word trauma to tell you guys about it because that's a word everybody understands. In Scientology, they talk about charged incidents, literally electrically charged incidents. They tell you that you are carrying around sheets of energy that are mental image pictures that affect your physically affect your body and mind. And that these pictures are important and they have weight and mass and you carry them around with you. And that is what your mind is composed of, is either the pictures themselves or the machinery that creates them. And you are led to believe that by going back and recalling these past moments of trauma and stress and charge, that you are decharging, you are destimulating, you're taking away or removing and actually erasing all of that charge connected with those incidents. And in Scientology mindset, the charge is the trauma. The reason that the incident or the episode or the painful experience is traumatic for you is because of this charge, because of the built up charge caused by the friction between you as a thetan and the physical universe and your intention and the physical universe countering your intention. And if that sounds kind of goofy already, it is. None of this is really sensible stuff. It's built on a whole foundation of very, very shaky principles and really broken straws. But Hubbard makes it out that this is a very solid foundation. So what's actually happening is you're going into the sessions and you have all this indoctrination, and they do set you up beforehand. You don't go into an auditing session flying blind. You are prepped. You are primed with all this information I'm telling you and a lot more. And so when you go in, you'll have expectations of what's going to happen. And the auditor who's sitting there auditing you, that's the process. That's what's called auditing. Whether it's Dianetics or Scientology auditing, there's a lot of different ways they can do it. But the bottom line is every single session has certain things that are always the same. One of those is that the auditor is sitting between you and the door. And you don't get to leave that room until the auditor says you get to leave the room. You're not done until they say you're done. Until the e-meter, sometimes they use this electronic device. Often this is used to help verify that the process is completed and to look for and search for that charge. Where's the incident that has all the charge connected to it? Well, when the needle moves on the dial of the e-meter, that's what tells the auditor that there's something here to be explored and to get into. And so that's what leads the auditing along is this e-meter. But there is non-metered auditing as well. So I want to address all of that. And so the meter is very much a clincher, a sales clincher on this whole thing. But you can do auditing without an e-meter. So, and it still is kind of this brainwashy trance induction stuff. So you prime a person, you induce a trance state, you get them into this position where they're, back down the line a million years ago or whatever, and you're reliving these traumatic episodes. Now, when you're talking about past lives and stuff, you're also talking about false memory syndrome here and inducing false memories in people. But when they believe that they are true, when they need to be true, they emotionally invest in that. And people then think that this stuff is real. And they act and respond and think about it as though it's real. And that, 50 million years ago, they helped blow up a planet or wipe out a race of people. Or they got conked over the head by a lightning rod or something. I mean, whatever it is that happened to them, they're convinced that really did happen. And, that's not necessarily a good thing to be giving people that level of delusory kind of certainty. It's not a mythic idea in Scientology that you've lived before. It's a dead certainty you've lived before and that you will live again and that you need to do all this auditing in order to relieve all that. So to get into the brainwashing, it's these steps. It's the priming, the indoctrination, the false certainty. And then by going over and over and over these incidents, they are led to believe that you will relieve the charge and you will experience a euphoric awe experience. You'll have this like, oh my God, and you're not done with the auditing session until that happens. So you could be in there for 2 hours, you could be in there for 10 hours, but you're not leaving until that happens. And you're not getting up, and you're not going to the bathroom, and you're not getting something to eat unless the auditor says you can. That's controlling. That is coercive control. That is not a good thing. That is isolation, manipulation, and control by definition. And that is a standard, routine, ordinary auditing session. Now, there's lots more layers to this that we're not going to get into right now because I'd have to get into more technical stuff. But there are more layers to this because there's, this educational stuff, this priming stuff, it's really super important. And the control factor of not being able to get up and leave or have agency for yourself in these auditing sessions, that's a big deal. It might, I hope I'm not glossing over that because it's kind of huge. There's not a counselor in the world, short of you being involuntarily committed to a psychiatric institution, there is no psychologist in the world who's going to force you to carry on with a procedure or a method they're applying to you and not let you leave, not let you go to the bathroom, not let you have free will and agency. It's just not going to happen. It is completely unethical as a practice. Why? Because it subjugates the patient. It doesn't help them. It hurts them. It makes them into a slave. And that's what Scientology auditing is doing every single time you're going into an auditing session. And that's why I say it's really destructive, dangerous stuff. And then the layers of this go deep. And people get very committed to it, and they become addicted to the awe induction. They're going for the prize. They want that hit, that dopamine hit. And it does provide a dopamine hit because you're all set up and primed for it. And you keep going until you get it, and you're not done until you get it. So you actually learn over time how to kind of induce it in yourself, but only in this specific context of an auditing session. You don't run around in life thinking, oh, I can induce an awe experience now. Wow, I feel so great. There's a little tiny bit of that, but really it's confined to the auditing session. And the Scientologists believe they need an auditor. They need to be holding the cans. They need to be in a formal auditing session, which means they need to pay the Church of Scientology for the privilege of getting into that room and being locked up in it and being primed and indoctrinated and not being let out until they have that awe hit, that dopamine hit. And they pay for the privilege of doing this. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. So that's kind of my summary breakdown of all of that. I hope that I haven't looked at any comments as I've been going here. I hope that was a useful answer for you guys. Oh, good. You like that one. Okay, good. Yeah, good stuff. Okay. Yeah, like Amazon workers. Okay, good. So now let's go back and forth here. Let me catch my breath for a moment. Okay. Let's go to one of my pre-questions here. We'll pop that one off. We already answered that one. And let's do this one. Jay Moore asked me some time ago, is there any end goal for all this fundraising for the IAS? Nonprofits aren't supposed to hoard cash, but I don't see where the IAS money is being spent. Aren't the ideal orgs mostly being funded by local donations? The church doesn't just donate those pamphlets and books that get handed out, right? The public members pay for those. We have a lot of Scientology audiobooks in the library where I work. Those weren't donated by the church. Some parishioner paid for those things. So where's the IAS money going? All right. Good, let's go back to me. Okay, IAS is the International Association of Scientologists, and this is the brainchild of David Miscavige. This was not, as far as I can tell from everything I've read and put together, and I might be wrong about this, but my take is that L. Ron Hubbard never even knew that the IAS existed. It started in 1984. Hubbard died in 1986, and he was off in seclusion, hiding up in Creston, California during the last many years of his life. So he was not on the ground in tune with everything that was going on. And the fact of the matter is that the Church of Scientology needed money, and it needed it bad. The 1977 FBI raid on the Church of Scientology, which happened in Canada, America, UK, there were raids that happened, and law enforcement was coming after them hard. And 11 people ended up going to jail, including Ron Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue. That was the raid happened in 77. They ended up going to jail, I think, in 1981 or 82 is how long it took for all that to happen. And during that time, Scientology was getting a major shellacking in the press and media, and was also undergoing some incredible internal tumultuous nonsense. And Hubbard was shaking the tree and trying to get all of the bad apples to fall out. And he was convinced that there were all these infiltrations and bad actors and people pretending to be Scientologists. And he really dived into and descended down into a level of kind of paranoid madness in his final years that was quite striking. So the IAS was a solution to a problem, which was we need more money than we're already getting. We've shaken up the organization, and in the process of doing that, have split it up and almost collapsed it. Scientology I don't think they've ever been on the brink of their own self-destruction as closely as they were in the early 1980s. So money was tight. Money was not, coming in by the barrel full. Hubbard had raised prices, had done various things in order to get more money in, but they needed money. And the reason they needed money was for legal purposes. They had the court battles all over the world, not just in the United States. And they also had this schism happening, and they needed to kind of work through that. And they had the IRS after them. All this time that all this other stuff, the raid and all this other stuff was happening, the IRS was also dunning the church for unpaid taxes. Because in 1967, the Church of Scientology's tax exemption was revoked. They lost it. They did not have it. And they were still recognized as a religion and had religious recognition and protection in the courts, but they did not have tax exemption. And so they were building up a tax bill that was getting huge, big enough that eventually it was going to actually destroy and bankrupt the church as an entity. That's how big that was getting, because all through the 1970s, they did not pay one dime of taxes. Hubbard refused to allow any kind of settlement or tax thing with the IRS. It was absolutely not. They're not getting a dime of our money. Screw those guys. They're a bunch of suppressive jerks, and the IRS is just a representation of the suppression of the American government and governments in general, and blah, 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 blah. So Hubbard was not going to pay it, and he wasn't going to allow his organizations to. Yet that was incurring more and more legal costs, and there was reorganization and restructuring of the church that was happening from the top to the bottom. So this is when RTC was developed, and the Author Services, Hubbard's literary agent organization, was set up, and lots of other little things were set up. The Church of Spiritual Technology, which is doing all the vaults and the grounds and all that crap. All of this was happening, and this restructuring was happening in the early to mid 1980s. And all of that was being done so Hubbard could come out of hiding, but never did pull that off, and Hubbard ended up dying while he was in hiding. So Miscavige was, again, desperate for money, and he set up the International Association of Scientologists as a membership organization, which would be the solution to this problem. Rather than pulling money in for books and lectures and services, they were going to get Scientologists to just give them money for nothing back. Here's your title. Here's your pin, your lapel pin you can wear that I'm an IAS member, for $100,000, for $200,000, for $1 million. You just donate to Scientology's IAS, the International Association of Scientologists, and we'll give you the pledge pin, and we'll give you accolades, and we'll give you a little award plaque or trophy that you can stick on your desk or stick on your wall. And we're running with your money, man. We're taking it. And this was mainly funneling money to legal, right? Because they had big, big legal problems. And not just in the defensive mode, but also remember, this is the Church of Scientology. So their legal funds also are the thing that funds all the fair gaming, all the harassment and stalking. And in the 1980s, they were up to their eyeballs in harassment and stalking. Because that schism had happened, and there were people going off and doing Scientology independent of the church, and they wanted to destroy that. Well, it costs money. And they needed to defend themselves against the IRS. That costs money. And they had these other legal bills for all these other problems, and that costs money. And then David Miscavige wanted a slush fund, so that cost money. And, just money demands all over the place. And the IAS turned out to be the wonderful, brilliant solution to that problem. And they have been raking in more and more and more and more money over the decades since 1984, when that started, through the IAS. It is not transparent. They do not have to report that money, as I understand it. It's international. It's offshore. It's not even in the United States, and nobody really knows exactly how much is there. Nobody outside the church, and nobody who's ever left has come out with any books or ledgers or bank statements or anything. We got nothing. Right? I mean, the IRS probably knows. I mean, government agencies can find this information out. After 9/11, in the post 9/11 world, you are not going to get away with moving a whole lot of money around too easily without some ability, some accountability or traceability. But that takes forensic accounting and investigation, and if there's no reason to do that, then they're not going to do that. So they could find this information out, but no indication that anybody's doing any of those investigations. A slush fund, Henny, is just money that Miscavige could spend at his whim, whatever he wants to spend it on. Miscavige has lavish tastes. And he has expensive clothes, expensive shoes, expensive food, expensive toys. He gets around on, private. I don't know if he flies private jets. Probably. I can't imagine him flying first class anywhere. I'm pretty sure he's flying private. And everything about his life is secluded and hidden away. And he's the most, the least transparent Scientologist on the planet, pretending to be the hardest working Scientologist. And that's been that way since the 1980s, ever since he took power. So when I said slush fund, I just meant, bankrolling his needs and wants and desires. Okay, so there you go. So somebody's saying, please look at my question. All right. Gonna cruise back up the line here. Okay, Selma, I'm seeing your question. Do you have any idea if Scientology ideas do better in the U.S. than, for instance, Western Europe? Okay, we'll get to that, Selma. First things first, I've got to go back up here and handle the questions that people have been super chatting to me. So that was my answer to that question. I hope I covered everything there, but that was, as far as the money and the IAS, what's the IAS for? What's that all about? I think I just covered that pretty thoroughly. So let's go to Frostfire's question that was super chatted to me earlier. What do you think about Freud, and how would you compare him to Hubbard? Yeah, you guys don't ask easy questions. But I'll try to give an easy answer on this one. I'm not down with Freud particularly. I don't think Freud's big claim to fame, and Hubbard even credited him with this, was that he was a forerunner, a creator, or sort of a guy who put forward that there was this sort of thing called a mind, and a mind was important, and a mind could affect a person, and maybe experiences and past traumas and past experiences could have a notable influence or could mess with you, later on in your life. And I don't know that Freud invented these ideas, but he certainly popularized them and made them well known. And his ideas were kind of goofball. I mean, his whole, all the sexual stuff and there's a lot of what we call projection happening with Freud, where he took his own personal issues or problems or arbitrary ideas and opinions and laid them out as though they were a template for this is how everybody is, which is not a whole lot different from what L. Ron Hubbard did. And that's probably where the meeting of those two minds occurs most, is in projection. L. Ron Hubbard took all of his legion of personal, medical, crises and problems and trauma and issues. And he laid it all out as though this is everybody. Everybody has this problem. Everybody has these issues. And he thought that he could pontificate his way out of these things and fool people into believing his bullshit, basically. And that through that, he would gain more power and like spiritual power and ability, because Hubbard had a few different things going on. And I'm going to do a podcast in a few weeks with John Atack about this, where we're going to dive in really hard on this. So I'm only going to give this a gloss over here in this show. But Hubbard had occult beliefs. Hubbard believed in a whole other layer of spirituality and occult practices, and practiced sex magic and blood magic and rituals and auditing, and Scientology's whole framework, the bridge, and this these levels of indoctrination you're going to ascend, and through this ascension you're going to gain spiritual ability and power. This has occult roots. This wasn't just Hubbard's, like one day he went, oh, Thetans. Yeah, no, he was a Crowley fanatic, and he was well-read, but familiar with hypnotism and familiar with blood and sex magic, and Crowley's brand of it, Thelema. And he and the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and this group and this activity and the Golden Dawn. I mean, these things are littered throughout Scientology's literature and throughout its labeling and of its own practices. Hubbard was just ripping off the occult pretty openly. But to Scientologists and to the world at large, you got to dig through some layers before you get down to that occult stuff. It's not obvious unless you know what to look for, and unless you're familiar with some of that stuff. Anyway, so Hubbard took those practices, those occult ideas, as the actual way to go about dealing with his own personal issues and problems. He believed, for example, that he had a guardian spirit that followed him around. It was this red-headed, green-dressed woman. He saw her on the wing of an airplane he was flying one time. This goes all the way back to the 20s and 30s. I mean, this is old L. Ron Hubbard stuff. And he brought all of that into Scientology. And like I said, I'm just going to gloss over this right now because we're going to deep dive into this with John in a couple weeks. But that's a big part of what Scientology is actually about. It's a manifestation or realization of Hubbard using Scientologists to boost his idea of his own spiritual power and immortality. Right. And that was what Hubbard was really going for. And it wasn't about saving the planet or freeing the world or making the world a better place or helping other people out. It was about his personal power and glorification and achieving immortality through that. Crazy stuff. Now, in terms of how that relates to Freud, I don't think Freud was on any occult kick or anything. I was just kind of talking about that projection point. Freud's, I'm not super familiar with all the various details of Freud's, stuff. So I only know the broad strokes, Freudian psychoanalysis, not super helpful stuff. Hubbard claimed Freud and Breuer were hypnotizing people, which I thought was interesting since that's what Hubbard's doing. But he lambasted them for doing that. And he said it was all a con and it was all an operation that Freud was running on people. And, you have to wonder, was Hubbard talking about himself or was Hubbard talking about Freud? There was so much of that through the history of Scientology. So, all right. Anyway, there you go with that. All right. Let me, thank you, Atypical Paul, for your super chat. Very appreciated. Cool. Okay, let's see here. Just cruising through the, I'm not pretending to read all the comments today, but I am looking for questions. So just want to check and see if there were any other super chats I'm missing. Nope. Okay, good. So now I'm going to go back up here. Okay. So I see Shimoda's question. But let's first go back. I think that was a super chat question. So now let's go back to my prepared questions here because I want to get through those as well. So let's go to this one. All right, Turd Ferguson. Love that name. What is the earliest stage that one might encounter sect checking? What was the earliest instance that you're aware of and what brought it on? Also, we have seen innumerable examples of Scientology violating priest penitent privilege. This seems like a major legal exposure for them that could result in a cascade of fairly easily winnable cases, as all that would be required would be to prove that anyone other than the parishioner's personal auditor had access to any confidential files. Is the thing holding this back the fact that Scientology cries bigotry in order to prevent the folders from being entered into evidence? Or is there more to it? Any insight would be interesting and appreciated. All right. Go back to me here. Okay, so sect checking, Scientology security checking, confessionals, interrogatories, interrogations. It's a kind of auditing where you are locked in the room with the auditor, all of that, using the e-meter. It's always done with an e-meter. And it is... and you're not getting out of there until you have that euphoria. But it's all about pulling personal information from you. It's about interrogating you in your life, looking for all of your dirty deeds and sins and moral transgressions and pulling them from you, getting all the details, time, place, form, and event, right? What happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? How did it happen? How'd you, what were you doing at the time? How'd you justify it? Who almost found out about it? And if the needle is not, doing its deal, doing its little nice dance at the end of that, we're going to look for an earlier time that you did something just like that. And we're going to get the who, what, when, where, and how was it justified and who almost found out about it. And if it's still, the needle's still not doing its dance, we're going to go earlier and find an earlier time you did something very similar to that dirty deed. And we're going to pull all the specifics of that. And we could be at this all day long, going earlier until we're 5 million years down the track, pulling your earlier similar overts. And maybe it started with, I stole something from my office, like a ream of paper or something, and it goes back to 5 million years ago when you ripped off, the Federal Reserve of some planet and took all their money or something. I mean, who knows where it could go. Goes lots of places, but that's how sect checking works. In a nutshell, that's what it is. The questions are prepared beforehand. The auditor does not make them up on the fly. And they are precise and they are run through until they are done. And the meter is what tells you you're done, not you. And that's another factor in the Scientology auditing and brainwashing, by the way, that I didn't get into earlier. But when the meter is there, the meter is what determines where you're doing, what you're doing, how you're doing, not you. The auditor doesn't care what you have to say about anything other than answering his or her questions. The auditor has questions, they need answers. Or the auditor has commands that you're going to do, and all the auditor cares about is your compliance. That's it. Auditing is a compliant creation mechanism. It's a way of getting your mind compliant with what Scientology wants from you and getting you habituated to complying. In terms of getting down to brass tacks about brainwashing. Now, as far as how young can it go, as young as a person can talk. Generally speaking, Hubbard said something about 8 or 9 years old is when you would actually start being able to audit, kids. And you wouldn't start with security checking, although there is a children's sec check. So it has been done. It can be done. And the thing about auditing children is you got to keep the sessions short. Hubbard was crystal clear about that because he said children's attention spans are not very long. So you have to do what's called short sessioning. auditing, where you have an auditing session and it's a fully formal session, but you only let it go for about 10 or 15 minutes. Otherwise, the kids' attention's all over the place, and they don't want to stay there, and they become completely non-cooperative, and it just becomes completely counterproductive to try to audit a kid beyond that. And there's, we could do, I am sure, deep analysis of that too, but I'm sure you can understand easily why that would be that way. Okay, now as far as the question of, let's pull this back up here real fast because I want to make sure I'm getting all of this. Oh yeah, the whole thing about violating priest-penitent privilege. Yeah, let's put this to rest right now. It's not easy. It's not these easily winnable cases. No. And this Masterson case and Laura DiCrescenzo's case years ago both demonstrate this point, okay? Because Laura actually fought for and got her files, her confidential priest-penitent files from the church. First time, and as far as I know, only time that's ever happened. But even the files she got back had been vetted, there had been things taken out and sliced and diced and that kind of thing. You can prove, and they did prove in Laura's case, that over 100 people had access to her files. Doesn't matter. Scientology didn't get in any trouble for that. No criminal charges were brought because of that. And they're not going to be, because the Church of Scientology is a religion and its practices are protected under the First Amendment. And if you sign a contract that says you agree with the practices and methods and techniques of Scientology, then you just gave over your voluntary willingness and agreement as far as the law is concerned to let Scientology do whatever they want. Because it's a religion, it's a religious practice. So the court system does not give itself the power and doesn't have the power to go and investigate and judge religious practices. Period. You don't get that in the United States. This is why and the Masterson trial has really demonstrated this so clearly. The judge has been tiptoeing. The defense and the prosecution have had to tiptoe around every single time the word Scientology is even brought up in the courtroom. They got to tiptoe around it. They have to pretend that this isn't really what Scientology does. We're just talking about Scientology because this was the Masterson's victims' frame of mind, as they were scared of Scientology. They thought Scientology was going to stalk and harass them. But the entire time that this testimony is being brought up in the case, the judge and the prosecutor, the judge has to constantly tell the jury, we're not judging Scientology here. This isn't about whether it's true or false that Scientology does those things. We're just giving you this information so you will understand what the women were thinking. Like, that's the layers of protection that religion is afforded in this country, even when a blatant criminal cover-up is being described in witness testimony. It's very disheartening to me. I don't enjoy this. I don't think this is a really, that fun to watch or experience. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating to watch this go on like this, in fact, knowing what I know. And you guys, I'm sure it's the same thing. You guys know the deal. You guys have listened to us who come out of the church. You know what goes on in there. It's a criminal activity. It's a criminal outfit. And obstruction of justice is a real thing. And telling these women that they have no rights to go to the law, telling these women that it was their fault they were raped. I mean, what the hell are we doing here? But this is what they get away with under religious practice. It's a broad brush. There's a lot of good reasons why we want those protections, but when it comes to these destructive cults, they take advantage of them. And they use them and use them and use them to the nth degree, to extremes. You just, what? How are they getting away with that? Because that's what the law says they can get away with. And judges are just loath to go anywhere near it.
And so you go, well, wait a second now, you got these confessionals and this person is now, in Scientology, you share your secrets with them and you confess your sins and you give them all this dirt on yourself. And then you leave Scientology years later, like, Karen De La Carriere or me or Aaron or whoever, Leah, Mike. You leave, you screw you guys, right? And you start speaking out against it. You go, hey man, these guys are not just bad, they're abusive. This is bad. And Scientology then uses that dirt against you. Well, there were a few different places in Scientology where you confessed those things or talked to Scientology staff members about those things. Yes, you confessed them in an auditing session, but you also had it written up in a report and sent over to the ethics officer, and the ethics officer sat down with you and went over it. And the ethics officer is not an auditor. He's not a priest. It's not necessarily the same thing. You don't have all of those priest penitent protections, in other words. Now, I'm just sort of, this is a little conjectural on my part. I'm not a lawyer. That's why I bring lawyers onto my show who I know and can trust to talk to about this stuff. But the sourcing of the information may or may not have come out of your pre-clear folder. It could have come out of your ethics folder, or it could have come out of a conversation. And arguably, in a court of law, you could argue, well, we didn't have to pull it out of his pre-clear folders. He told us in other venues, in other formats, in other places. He wrote it down in an overt withhold write-up and gave it to us. And we have this information, and we're not violating any confidential agreements, because you also sign a contract going into Scientology that clearly, unequivocally states those folders and the information you give Scientology is not and never will be your property. Period. That belongs to the church and always will. So you ain't got no right to it. You ain't got no right to get it back. You ain't got no, how Laura pulled it off. I'm amazed. But that's what you sign. And the courts have to recognize the legitimacy of those contracts because they are legally binding contracts. And Scientology has spent an awful lot of money and an awful lot of time making sure of that. And it's paid them dividends. It's paid off huge, right? Because they've been avoiding human rights cases in Florida right now, and fraud lawsuits and stalking lawsuits from, Valerie Haney had to escape. They avoid all these lawsuits with these contracts. That's the other end of the legal, mumbo jumbo that they take advantage of. So you make it sound like in the question that it's this easy thing. Oh, you just got to prove that they took the data from the folders. Yeah, good luck proving anything when it comes to the religious practice of Scientology and getting that into the courtroom. And that's kind of my beef and problem with the whole thing. But at the same time, that's the reality that we're all faced with. And we've been witnessing it firsthand over the last 3 weeks in the Masterson trial. So there you go with that. All right. Just going to fly on down the list here. Okay. Shimoda, I like your question. And I like the way you put it, by the way, because you put my name there, which highlights it, and then wrote question and then put the question. If you guys can do that in the comments, I really would appreciate it. Much better chance that I'll be able to catch it out of when I'm scrolling through the questions here. Okay, since you said people aren't allowed to go to the toilet, the bathroom, during auditing sessions, and you can be there for 10 hours, has anyone ever peed themselves? Yes, of course they have. But it's not common. Normally speaking, you do get to a flat point. You get to some rest period or something where the auditor will give you a break. I mean, it's pretty routine that you'll get breaks, okay? But here's the point. It's up to the auditor to decide that, not you. 100% of the time. So if the auditor doesn't feel like taking a break, you ain't taking a break. Period. I really want to get that. I really want to get that across, because that is the harsh truth of this. Is the auditor will watch you piss your pants before allowing you to leave the room, if the auditor is convinced that running the process and doing what they're doing right now is the right thing to be doing for you. They will. They absolutely will. It's 100% ball is in their court, not yours. And if you try to get up and leave, I don't know if I made this clear earlier, I certainly have in other videos, but you try to get up and leave, they will stop you. They are trained. They practiced it to grab you and put you back in the chair. And they don't think twice about it. Doesn't register at all as some problematic thing to do. It's what they're trained to do. Yeah, it's kind of bad. Okay. Cool. Let's go down the line here. I'm sure I am missing all kinds of questions here. Okay, being Dutch myself, I have sometimes a bit of a problem with the whole getting into Scientology and being captured in the web. Okay, I'm not sure what if there's a question there. Selma then says, part 2, do you have any idea if all the Scientology ideas do better in the US than, for instance, Western Europe? No, they do fine everywhere. Scientology's appeal is based on appeal to authority and appeal to emotion. And everybody registers and recognizes authorities, and everybody has emotions. And therefore, their emotions can be appealed to, because there is not one single human being on the planet who doesn't have an ego, who doesn't feel that their life could be better, that they could be doing better, that something is maybe wrong with them in some fashion, holding them back. You know, this is the norm for human beings and their existence, no matter what culture you're in. There is no culture that's conquered ego. There is no culture that's conquered trauma. There's no society that's got it all figured out and everybody there is given their all and is 100%. It doesn't work that way. Human beings are basically flawed emotional creatures, and we use our rationality to justify our actions and our behavior and do the best we can and navigate the world, through whatever moral foundation and culture we happen to grow up in and with. So that's every human being. And Scientology is designed to appeal to those needs that people have, and there are a lot of them. I mean, we have, what is this, 9 or 10 different emotional needs I keep on my little handy Post-it note here. We all have a need for security. We all have a need for community. We all have a need for a strong sense of self. And when we're in our moments of down, depression, anxiety, we're not feeling so great, we are vulnerable. And at the right time, the right words from the right person can impact anybody in any language and any culture, and can get to them and deceive them in such a way that they think that this group, the Church of Scientology, has a tool set or a set of techniques and methods that will improve their lives. And if they buy into that simple idea, that's step number 1. And if they then go and practice it or do it, they get an auditing session or they take a class and are presented with fairly common sense principles and this nice packaging, and they go, oh, well, this makes a lot of sense. This is helping me solve a problem I have in my life right now. If that happens, that's step number 2. And step number 3, common across the boards with any human being, is the unwarranted assumption that if it helped me there, it will absolutely help me in all these other places too. And they take their next step and go a little deeper. And if the next step helps, they're even more committed, right? Then it's 100%. Then they assume all of this works. Now, not everybody does this, not by a long shot, but enough people act this way. Enough people have these vulnerabilities that Scientology and other destructive cults get to prey on them. And by prey, I mean prey, like predators. That's what they do. And that's kind of the correct framing for this, is they consider, these people are prey and they're preying on them. So that's why it has a universal appeal. It's not just an American thing. I get asked this sometimes and I'm always like rolling my eyes going, what, are human beings in Europe a different class of person or something? They're not. They have all the same problems and issues as anybody else and all the same vulnerabilities. And so that's, I don't know, that's what I can say about that. I don't mean to, like be all whatever. it just makes me laugh because I'm kind of like, why, no, we're all the same basically. And the things that we respond to, tend to be fairly universal, especially when it comes to rigorous cult control techniques that have been refined and worked over again and again and again. I mean, with Scientology, for example, you don't have to believe me. I mean, look at the fact that it thrives in places as disparate as India, Taiwan, or Thailand. Taiwan. I'm always getting those messed up. That is totally my bad. America, Canada, Latin America. It's huge in Latin America. And in Venezuela, they love Scientology down there. Europe, right? Australia, Italy. Italy goes hog wild for Scientology. There are so many hardcore Italian Scientologists. So many. In fact, the most successful Scientology organization in the world for a very long time was Milano in Italy. Huge, thriving, gigantic. Hundreds of people walking through the place. This is years and years ago. This is back in the 90s that this was happening. But no, there's nothing in Europe that's going to protect you from Scientology. Okay. Cool. So I hope that helps. Moving on down the line here. Yes. Thank you, Nerman. Okay. All right. Oh, hey, Steve. Glad to see you on board here. Now, I think, having answered that question, I'm going to flip over to, I'm going to go back over to the prepared questions because we do have a couple more of those. I think we've done 3 of them so far. So let's go back. Here's the next one. Hope this is going okay so far, by the way. We're over an hour into this, and I've been, I think we're doing pretty good. All right, mea culpa. Regarding underage Sea Org members, when someone who is still within the compulsory school attendance age range joins the Sea Org, how does Scientology get around those pesky truancy laws? Would someone as young as 15 or so actually end up in the RPF for infractions deemed worthy of such a punishment? Is there a minimum age for that? What about the whole? And did you ever know of someone being on the RPF at a very young age? I've read that children are not seen as children in Scientology, so my guess is that the age of the individual would not come into consideration. I certainly hope I'm mistaken, but somehow I doubt it. All right. Come on back to me. And, okay, kids in the Sea Org and Scientology. So the youngest I've ever heard of somebody going on to the RPF was back in the 1970s when it first started. I think it was 9 years old. That's the youngest I've heard of that. Now, the RPF has also gone through various iterations. And so I'm not trying to apologize in any way, but I am saying that it's not always been exactly the same torturous program that I did. I did the RPF in the 2000s, and it was fucking hell. Pardon my French. It was that way for most people most of the years, but back in the day, it was also originally a little bit more of a short vacation from your post. You had to do hard physical labor, but it wasn't quite as grueling, and it didn't last anywhere near as long. It was not a years-long activity. You'd go off for a few weeks and then go do your thing and then come back, and you didn't have this whole formal process that I had to go through and so many other people did. That came a few years later. So anyway, I don't even know why I say all that, but it's just to give some more background for it. But anyway, as far as kids go, yeah, kids have ended up on the RPF over time. And the reason for this, of course, goes back to what you alluded to in the question. Scientologists do not consider kids to just be kids. They are adults in little bodies. This is adults in little bodies. That is children in Scientology. And the amount of damage that stupid idea has created, the amount of just criminal activity that has been carried out against kids, well, through labor trafficking, through sexual assault, through pedophilia. I mean, just the number of things, not to mention just standard Scientology, just training children as young as 12 years old to do these confessionals, to do Scientology auditing. You can learn how to be an auditor as a kid, and I saw kids do it. And then go security check adults. So here you have a 13 or a 14-year-old pulling the sexual, crimes of some 40-year-old. This happens. This is a routine kind of thing. If you're a Scientologist and you're an auditor, you go into an auditing session, you're responsible for it, and you're in charge of it. And if you're auditing some guy who's significantly, or some woman who's significantly older than you, it doesn't matter, because your body isn't you. You're a spirit. You're a Thetan. And your Thetan is endlessly old. There is no age to a Thetan. And a Thetan's never going to die. And that's who you really are. So we don't care about your excuses and your little tiny body and your crying and your fidgeting and all your nonsense. We don't care about any of that, because that's not who you are. Stop dramatizing. Stop being a little kid. Stop being banky. Stop throwing your reactive mind around. These are the things that Scientology children are told to get them under control and tell them to stop being kids. Stop it. Stop being a kid. You don't have a right to be a kid. You're an adult. This is a Scientology attitude, and it's highly destructive to the normal progression of a child's stages of development. It's grossly prohibitive. It forces a child to leap through those stages of development and go straight to adult. And children are not ready for that. Not at all. Right? And that's just one angle, looking at it from a psychological perspective. But, morality-wise, morally, this is just heinous. It's disgusting. Because there have been, problems with, again, labor trafficking and sexual assault of children who were treated as adults in little bodies. It's really quite gross. Okay, so that's my rundown on that. As far as all the specifics of it, because of all of what I just said, you can find abuses of children at every level of Scientology, from public level Scientologists. And, if you want a real hard look at this, take a look at my recent interviews with Ian Rafalco, who grew up as a second-generation Scientologist of famous, well-off Scientologists in a good home. He didn't want for things, and yet he wanted for love. He wanted for attention. He wanted for somebody to recognize his existence as an independent little child. He never got any of that growing up in a Scientology household. Why not? Well, we go into it. How his parents treated him. And his experience is not some outlier in the Scientology world. Ian's experience is typical for how Scientologists treat their kids. It's really bad. So, all right. So that's what I will say about that. Okay. And let's go back to the comment section, and I'll bop back over there. All right. Okay. Looking for questions. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Educo N. Sorry, I'm sure I'm butchering that. Question: have you been watching The Vow Season 2? What are your thoughts on Rainier's obsession with interfering with families? Is this a theme amongst malignant narcissists? I have not yet watched The Vow Season 2. I've watched The Vow Season 1, but I did not yet get into Season 2. Sorry about that. So I can't answer specifically what you're referring to with his obsession with interfering with families. What I will say about what I've noticed with Rainier, and thank God that monster is in jail, because that is what he is. I understand from what I've seen on Twitter and in a few places that there's a lot of concentration on Nancy Salzman, his sort of second in awful, that ran Nexium. And she's trying to skid out of this by saying she was a victim too, and blah, 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 and blee, 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 and blue, 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 and poor me, I didn't know. Screw Nancy Salzman. She's just as culpable, and she should be in jail as well. That's my feelings on that. And I'll definitely say that loud and proud. I have no sympathy for Nancy Salzman whatsoever. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she partnered with Keith Raniere. She was not a victim of him. She was his partner. At least according to all the information data I have. Maybe I don't have as deep a dive as other people do on that particular group, but that's what I see in her. As far as the theme of messing with families, I'm not sure exactly what Raniere did, but I will say that, when you have a cult leader mindset is the ultimate in the privileged, entitled mindset. These are people who don't have boundaries, they don't have boundaries. They don't believe in them. With other people, meaning, no, you don't get any boundaries. I get to ask you anything, do anything, say anything, ask anything of you, and you're expected to comply. It's all about compliance. Right? That's what if you're wondering, why all these techniques of coercive control, why all this deception and run around and screwing with people's heads and introverting them and getting them thinking they're the ones doing this to themselves, and why all of that? Because these are scared, frightened little men and women these cult leaders I'm talking about now, who know that they cannot make an honest living in the world. They can't make their way through life the way the rest of us do, and they know it. And for them, it's a big game. It's a big trick. It's a big, it's fun for them to mess with people, to screw with people's heads and minds and control them. Control them. That's what it's about. It's about coercion. It's about control. It's about compliance. And that's why you see cult leaders from one place to another, always doing the same stuff. They're always using the same techniques. They have individual variations for their belief set, but the techniques are always the same because this is how you control people and get them into a compliant state of mind, is you have to beat down their ego, make them think that they're pretty much that they're lesser than the cult leader or leadership or the dogma. They're less than that, and they can achieve greatness, but they've got to jump through all these hoops. That's NXIVM, that's Scientology, right? That's a lot of these groups out there, is you got all these hoops you got to jump through, all these loyalty tests you have to pass, so that you will get this prize that doesn't even exist. And that's the kicker with every one of these groups, is the prize, the carrot that you're chasing, it doesn't even exist. There is no such thing as clear and OT. NXIVM's bullshit. It's, sex with Keith was the highest thing you could aspire to in that group, was having sex with Keith. I mean, that's crazy, but that's, at the end of the day, that's really what that group is all about. And all the layers of deception and money and control and all of it came down to that brutally primitive, disgusting purpose. And that's kind of that evil little thing that sits at the heart of these groups. With Hubbard, it was adoration, and you're never going to forget his name, and you're never going to stop saying it, and you're going to keep going with that, and Hubbard's going to live forever as a result. And Hubbard still lives. We're still talking about him. You see what I mean with that? Anyway, kind of went off on a thing there, but okay. So I'm sorry I couldn't give you more on that, Educo. I need to watch season 2. I definitely do. Okay. Selma, now just to treat your question, just to see what you said here, Selma, when you said, we are the same, you were right, I just thought maybe we have a different upbringing or something. We do. We absolutely do. But I'm trying to make the point that it doesn't matter. Those aren't the upbringing you have, the education you have, the moral foundations you have, the belief set you have and follow, none of that matters when it comes to how you can be manipulated and controlled. That's where I was going with all of that, right? Is all of those differences are very important to the variety of our lives and how we go about interacting, and why the world is such an amazing place, because we are so infinitely varied in our experiences and backgrounds and language and everything. And and that's all wonderful stuff. but it doesn't change the fact that we are all vulnerable because we're human. And that's a condition that none of us can out-teach, outgrow, outthink, outbelieve. We're always human. And so we have those vulnerabilities. Okay. Cool. So Frank V asks, are all auditing sessions the same price for celebrities and, let's say, Sea Org members? Yeah, the price of auditing varies depending on where you're receiving it, not who you are. Celebrity will pay the same rates as anybody else for Scientology auditing, but it depends on where you're getting it. If you're getting auditing at a city level church, then you're getting auditing at the fairly cheapest rate it can be offered, which is basically about, I think, $3,000 or so, $3,000 or $4,000 for each 12.5-hour block of auditing. Those are called intensives. You buy intensives of auditing. You buy blocks of time. You're not actually paying for it by the hour. You're paying for it by the intensive. And these are sold in packages, and they have sliding scales because it's a sales organization. Let's keep in mind, Scientology is a money-making scam first, religion second. So the sliding scales and all that. But the level of organization you're receiving services at matters, because if you go up to a Sea Org organization, they're going to charge you more. And the reason they're going to charge you more is because Hubbard set it up that way. And the model is that you're getting a higher quality of service at the Sea Org level than you are at the city level, at the what's called the Class 5 level. The city level churches are Class 5 organizations. The Sea Org organizations are higher classed organizations, all the way up to the Clearwater Flag organization, the Flag Service Org. That huge monstrosity of multiple organizations actually is a Class 12 organization. And if you go to Clearwater for your Scientology services, you will be paying more there than you will anywhere else in the world. You'll be paying 2 to 3 times the rate, maybe even 4 times the rate that you would pay at the city level. Okay, so it incrementally goes up. The rates do, depending on where you're at. And that's how that works. Okay. Cardboard Caskets here. Hey, I wanted to say something real fast. We had some comments back and forth the last time I did a live stream Q&A, and I responded a little harshly to something you said about talking about politics because it's a trigger button for me, not because of what you said. And I wanted to take a moment in my next live stream here, if you were here, to apologize for that, because I did overreact. I only saw one of your comments, not the whole stream of them. I think we sorted this out after, but I wanted to publicly kind of put that out there that was on me. And I very much appreciate your support. Okay, moving right along here. Let's go back to, we'll get back to the comment questions, but let's get back over to the preset questions because I got 2 more of those I want to get to before I wrap this show up here. So let's go to number 5. This is A Court. You seem to have spent a lot of time at the Scientology org in the Twin Cities. What were you doing there, and what is it like? Most of the locals thought it was humorous that what we thought of as a science fiction cult was setting up shop in the former actual science museum. To us, it seemed like Scientology was trying too hard to prove they were actually science-based, when I'm pretty sure science involves actually being able to ask questions and think critically, which Scientology seems to lack. All right. Good old Twin Cities. Okay, so let's see here. How do I want to answer this? So I was sent out to Twin Cities in Minnesota. This is the Minneapolis-St. Paul. And I got pretty familiar with the place because I was out there for a couple years off and on. I'd go out there and then I'd go back out to LA, go back out to Twin Cities, go back out to LA. And I spent quite some time there meeting and greeting and working with Twin City Scientologists and helping establish their ideal organization there. And they opened up their ideal org, their newly renovated space. in the old Children's Science Museum. It's an 80,000 square foot monstrosity of a building. It's huge. It's beautiful. It's got huge wide open spaces and lots of glass walls and all the classrooms that were set up in there. And there's 2 levels of classrooms. There's the public level, introductory level classrooms, and there's about 6 of them. And then there's the big course rooms up on the 2nd floor, which are for the advanced courses, that more advanced courses, not the OT levels, but the advanced Scientology services, auditor training, that kind of thing, on the 2nd floor. And they've got a few hundred chairs for students. I mean, I think the total number of student bodies they could fit in that building, I think I counted it up, and I think I'm remembering it right, at about 540 or something, some ridiculous number. I mean, I still have it. The spreadsheet of names of active Scientologists in the Twin Cities area was 115 names. So if you got every single Scientologist in the Twin Cities area, all around in the 5-state region around that building, and you got them into the org to do services, it would still look empty because that building just swallows people. It was the most ridiculous purchase of an ideal org I saw. It was crazy. Anyway, so what did we do? We spent an awful lot of time trying to fill it up. And actually, not even that, because our orders were really all about fundraising. So where you would think we would have been out trying to sell books, bring people in, get a lot of bodies in there, try to get people interested in Scientology, show them our displays and sell them books and sell them basic courses. We weren't really doing any of that. We were just trying to take those existing 115 people and recycle them through as many fundraising events as we could. And it was ridiculous, but that's what we spent our time doing. And this was on the final project, the longest one that I was on there. I spent over a year working there on this. I think it was over a year. And even then, even in my position in the Sea Org, I was questioning this. I was like, why aren't we trying to bring any new people in? Why aren't we getting this stuff going? Why aren't we filling up this incredible building with more people? Not our orders. Our orders are to get the fundraising going. And so that's what we spent all our time doing. It was ridiculous. But that's Scientology for you. So yeah, there was never really any thought of, by the way, in answering the question here, A Court, there was never any thought of trying to get legitimacy by buying the old science building. It was just a cheap purchase. It was easy to buy because it was being sold very cheaply. I think it was only a couple $1 million. And for that building, that was a steal. And there was a local Scientologist who was a real estate woman, and she a realtor, and she's the one who arranged the purchase of that for the church. And that's what got approved, and that's what got purchased. And then they spent something on the order of $15 to $18 million renovating it. And they had to drag that money out of the local people for the most part in order to make that happen, which is why it took them years to buy the building, then get it renovated, then get it opened. I think the whole thing took something on the order of about 6 or 7 years. Okay. So there we go. All right. Okay. Going back up the line here, and I see R.R. Smith has super chatted. Okay. All right. R.R. Smith asks, can't stay because at work. So I hope you'll see this on the replay, RR. I will have to listen later. Can you explain a degraded being or tell me what to put in the search engine? Gotta go. Okay. L. Ron Hubbard came up with various catchphrases and terms to describe people who were not either being all they could be, or were non-Scientologists, or were somehow in Scientology but weren't making it, weren't pulling it off, weren't carrying their weight or carrying their load. And remember what I said earlier about cult leaders and how it's all about compliance. Well, Hubbard was big on issuing a lot of orders. He fancied himself to be this military man and he master of everything he ever surveyed. And the man's ego just had no bounds. So he expected people to follow his orders and do what he said and comply. And if they didn't, then there was something wrong with them. And what was wrong with them? Well, different things, but mostly what was wrong with them was Xenu and body thetans and that whole thing. And what Hubbard said is that somebody can choose to overcome their personal trauma and charge. And they can be a bigger being than their bank or their reactive mind or their charge is allowing them to be. They can pick themselves up by the bootstraps. This is this old school, rugged individualism kind of attitude of pick yourself up by your bootstraps and make something of yourself, right? And Hubbard was very much a believer in that, even though he could never do it in his own life. Interesting hypocrisy there, but it's true. Hubbard was incredibly bad at picking himself up by his bootstraps and carrying on. And it was only through sheer luck, really, that Dianetics happened. And it wasn't because Hubbard was a hard worker or a dedicated researcher or somebody who really had some sense of self-discipline and control. He didn't. But he, again, as all cult leaders do, master of projection, right? He would lay this out to other people. And if you couldn't fit the bill or cut the mustard, so to speak, if you couldn't keep up with his demands, then there was something wrong with you. And you were either psychotic, or if you were somebody who found humor and ridicule in things and laughed at things and thought, try to cope that way, you were a joker and degrader. And if you were just a general sloven, ne'er-do-well who never gets anything done properly and is constantly screwing things up, then you were a degraded being, a DB, degraded being. And that is a blow not only to your self-discipline or to your ego, it's to your very soul. Because you are choosing as a degraded being, deep, deep, deep down, to be the way you are. And you just aren't overcoming your body thetans, and you aren't overcoming your charge and your reactive mind. You're succumbing to them. You're degraded. And it's not that you can't be helped, and it's not that you can't pay money and get auditing and get up the bridge and become OT, but we don't really want you around too much on staff or in the Sea Org because you're a DB. And if you hang around the org and you're not doing services or paying for your services and doing them, then clearly you are a second-class citizen. You're somebody that we shouldn't be putting a whole lot of our beans into investing in, right? Because there's not going to be much return on our investment. You're a DB. And so, pick yourself up and get going and get with the program. And if you can prove you can do that, then maybe we'll reconsider our judgment. But until then, DBs. And if somebody in the Sea Org or on staff really pulled a pretty big blunder or really screwed up in some significant way, they could get that label. And it's not a permanent thing. It's not like a suppressive. It's not declaring you with a formal piece of paper. It's just more layers of ridicule and invalidation in order to make you less and make Hubbard more and make the church more than you are. So you'll stay and listen to them and avail yourself of their help, that you so desperately need by paying over more money. It always goes back to that. Okay. Okay. So. Awesome, man. Awesome. Okay. Let's go back to the last question I have in my prepared questions. Make sure I answered that. Yeah, I did that. Okay, let's do this last one. And this is Joseph Smith asking me this. I was surprised to hear you say that you believe Hubbard was sincere and not a deliberate fraud. Do you have any opinion on the various claims that he told his colleagues at Astounding that he planned to make a religion to make money, or that he and Robert Heinlein made a bet about it, or that some of the other writers helped him brainstorm Dianetics, not knowing that he was really going to try to sell it as a serious idea? All right. So, over the years, I've had various ideas about L. Ron Hubbard and his intentions. And I have, as a recovering Scientologist, so to speak, and somebody who's been, diving in and out of L. Ron Hubbard and his life and his motivations and his influences, and, some of which I've spoken to here in the show about the occult and that kind of stuff. It has been a real interesting educational trip to get into the headspace of L. Ron Hubbard. And, really it's all very subjective. It's very, we've got ideas about this. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're not. The only person at the end of the day who's really going to know is L. Ron Hubbard, and he ain't around to tell us anymore. However, what I can say is that I don't think that by saying that I think L. Ron Hubbard was sincere, that is not the same thing as saying he wasn't also conning people. He was very sincere about his con. Because his purpose, and this is what I was trying to talk about a little bit with the occult stuff earlier, his purpose was not what he said his purpose was. It wasn't about saving the world, clearing the planet, going on to Target 2 and clearing another one and blowing away this universe and making us all OTs. That's not what Scientology is really trying to do. So there's deception there, layers and layers of it. But when you get to the founder of the movement and what he was trying to do, you're dealing with a complex pathological personality. We're talking about multiple personality disorders, multiple dysfunctions cognitively and emotionally and certainly morally. The man was all over the place, even with himself in his own writings. And this is where we really get a little window into his soul, is through his personal writings and what are called the affirmations. And there's even a Wikipedia page on the affirmations where you can go look them up. And you'll be duly shocked at reading the personal writings of L. Ron Hubbard before Scientology even existed. And they're quite insightful. And one of the insights you get from that is that this was a man who knew deep inside that he was broken. And he was desperately trying to pick himself up and fix himself. And he had various ways and means of doing that. But at the same time that he was trying to pick himself up and fix himself, he was also unwilling to consider that he was not the greatest person who ever lived, the smartest guy in the room all the time. And he had one over on everybody else. And he was always coming at other people from the position or point of view of how do I get one over on this person? And he would do it through bullshitting, through storytelling, through tall tales, lies, right? He was pathological. But it worked. It was a workable thing for him to do in the time and culture and place that he came from, being the larger-than-life storytelling heroic figure and always presenting himself that way was how he got along in life. And he would just, take down anybody who tried to counter that or tried to get in his way or tried to tell him he wasn't all that, or he hadn't really done all those things, or he wasn't really that smart or brave or heroic or whatever. He would just destroy people who tried telling him that or tried putting that out there. So he was a complex guy. There's a lot going on with him. And that's what I mean about the sincerity, is that he was sincerely trying to find ways to fix himself, to deal with his own issues. He had physical problems, mental problems, right? And he knew it. But he wasn't letting on to the rest of the world as to what those problems were. This was all hidden secret stuff for him. So was there sincerity there? Yeah, there was. But was it well-intentioned sincerity? Was it a sincerity that extended to other people and open and, being open and transparent with them and honest? No, because he didn't know how to be honest with people. He lied for so many years about so many things so often. I don't know that he even knew what the truth was. And he started Dianetics and Scientology when he was in his 40s. I mean, he had well established the pattern of his life before all this even started. So his whole approach never really changed. What money and power do is they exacerbate who you already are. And Hubbard was not a good man, and he was not a well man. He was a broken man. And so money and power just blew up and exaggerated all of his flaws and made them into bigger, what he thought of as features, not bugs. He thought these were good things, and they're not. Megalomania, egotism, narcissism, these are the borderline personality that he had, the ups and downs, the frequent depressions. He was not a well man. But he put on a good show. He put on a good front. And that's who he was. And that's what that was about. So I wanted to throw all that out there because I thought that was important commentary on Hubbard's character, right? Who he really was and what he was really all about. Okay, so let's go back now. I've finished the preset questions that I had scheduled for this, and this is amazing. We've been going for almost 2 hours today, which is pretty cool for a Q&A show, I think. Never done this one like this. Okay, so I think I've gotten down to... Okay, here we go. This will be our last question that I'll answer for this show, just bopping back and forth between your questions and the ones I brought. So let's go ahead and do this one from Xenu, and then we will wrap up here. Question, which orgs did you visit? Did you ever go to any missions? Okay. I went to a lot of different orgs around the Western United States. I didn't go to every single one. There are 34 churches of Scientology in the Western United States. At least there were when I was running the show there. And I went to most of them. I have since leaving Scientology, I have been to the Austin church. But when I was in Scientology, I never went to Austin, Texas. And I never went to St. Louis. I still haven't been to the St. Louis Scientology church. And I have never been to the Albuquerque Church of Scientology. But I've been to every other Church of Scientology in the Western United States. So Seattle, Portland, the Bay Area churches, the Los Angeles area churches, San Diego, Hawaii, Twin Cities, Kansas City, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City. I've been to all of those. I think that's probably all of them. Yeah, I think so. And I've been to Clearwater in Florida. I've been to Flag. And I've been to the Chicago org. I went out there on a tour. Yeah, I think that's all of them. And then missions-wise, I've been to a lot of the missions that are in the state of California. I haven't been to too many other missions elsewhere. I don't think any other missions outside of California. I went to... there was one up in San Jose, Sacramento. Oh, yeah, I've been to the Sacramento org, all the Bay Area ones. I guess I consider Sacramento one of the Bay Area ones. So I've been to a mission up in Sacramento and missions up in Seattle, and in the Seattle area. I went around to those. So that's where I physically visited. Thanks for asking that. Okay. Wow. So we did a show. So let me just check real fast and just see if, since we are live and we are waiting so desperately for word about the Masterson trial. Let me see if we've got any updates from Tony. Nope. Okay. So still waiting on the jury. Just wanted to check on that because I thought if we're live and that jury came back, I definitely wanted to respond, but we're still waiting. So, so let's see what happens here. And thank you very much, everybody, for hanging around and watching me go on at a mad rate, answering all of your questions. I really, really, really love your support and viewership, all my critics out there. And please like, share, get my channel out there, get it around. And one last thing I do want to put out there for you guys in wrapping up the show here today is I am available for you if you are looking for professional consultation. And that is not therapy or counseling. I am not a licensed therapist. I am not a psychologist in that sense. That's not what I'm talking about. The consulting that I offer is sort of post-cult recovery help, advice, help for people who are trying to help their friends or family who are in a cult or domestic violence or coercive situations. I can help. I can give some guidance or some direction with my knowledge and skill set. And that's what I offer. So I just got to promote myself on that because it's kind of a new thing. And I do have some clients right now and it's going pretty good. And I'm trying to help people out and help myself make a living doing that at the same time. And so I'm putting that out there for you guys. So you can contact me if you are looking for assistance or help of that kind. Again, not therapy. I'm not doing that, but I am giving consultation and advice. So there you go. All right. And all that being said, I will say hi to Melissa. Thanks, guys, for coming around. And let's go ahead and wrap up the show. See you soon. Bye-bye.